20 Conservative MPs have helped defeat the government in a Commons vote aimed at frustrating a no-deal Brexit. 7 former cabinet ministers were among the rebels. More police will be on duty at Parliament in response to the intimidation of some MPs over their views on Brexit. The Commons Speaker has described the abuse as a type of fascism. Scotland Yard has brought in the military as it investigates a drone sighting that disrupted flights at Heathrow Airport. A judge has ruled that an inquiry by the Scottish Government into claims of sexual misconduct against Alex Salmond was unlawful and tainted with apparent bias. Donald Trump will warn the United States is facing a crisis on the Mexican border when he makes his first national address from the Oval Office since becoming president. The government has suffered a defeat in the Commons tonight by MPs who want Theresa May to rule out a no-deal Brexit. The Commons voted by 303 to 296, a majority of 7, in favour of a cross-party measure to restrict the government's powers to make changes to tax laws in the event of the UK leaving the EU without an agreement. The Prime Minister is also facing increasing pressure from ministers in her own cabinet who want her to reject the possibility of a no-deal Brexit if she's defeated in the Commons in a week's time when MPs vote on her deal with Brussels. Here's our political correspondent, Pete Saul.
Tonight, another defeat for the government over Brexit.
The ayes to the right, 303. The noes to the left, 296.
By a majority of 7, MPs backed an amendment to the finance bill. It means that if the government wants to make some technical changes to taxes in preparation for a no-deal Brexit, it would have to either seek Parliament's approval through another vote or ask to extend the Article 50 process beyond the end of March. In the Commons, the Treasury Minister, Robert Jenrick, played down the amendment's significance.
The law of the land is that the UK will leave the European Union on the 29th of March, and nothing contained in this amendment will change that. The only difference this amendment will make, as I'll come on to say, is that the UK will be somewhat less prepared for that eventuality.
However, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said the result was an important step, and it proved there was no majority in Parliament for a no deal. 20 Conservatives rebelled, and 17 of them used to be ministers. The former Education Secretary, Nicky Morgan, made her feelings clear.
Well, I have to say that no deal is a terrible deal, and it would be a gross dereliction of the responsibility of members of this House to inflict a no deal situation on our constituents.
Some Brexiteers are more relaxed, including the former Northern Ireland Secretary, Theresa Villiers.
If Parliament rejects the withdrawal agreement, which I hope it will do on Tuesday, then there's one of 2 outcomes. Either there are further negotiations and a fresh deal is put to Parliament, or we leave on managed WTO terms. That would potentially lead to some disruption, but it's disruption that we can cope with.
Theresa May addressed dozens of concerned MPs at a meeting in Parliament earlier. She told them the only way to avoid a no deal was for MPs to back her deal. But the Prime Minister's having to contend with growing unease within the Cabinet too. The Work and Pension Secretary, Amber Rudd, suggested the public would take a dim view of the government if it settled for a disorderly exit. The Business Secretary, Greg Clark, said such an outcome could not be contemplated.
Downing Street shrugged off the defeat, saying the amendment to the finance bill made only the most minor and technical changes to the legislation. But as our political correspondent Alex Forsyth explains, the result shows the strength of MPs' opposition to a no-deal Brexit, as the Commons prepares to resume its debate on Theresa May's plan.
Ahead of tonight's vote, perhaps expecting what was to come, Number 10 tried to play down the impact of this amendment. The Prime Minister's spokesman dismissed its possible implications as an inconvenience rather than anything more significant. It's true it won't prevent a no-deal Brexit, nor will it paralyse the government financially. Rather, it was designed to frustrate the no-deal process and, most importantly, show the strength of opposition among MPs to leaving the EU without an agreement in place. Some of them said it proved Parliament would not allow that to happen. For the Prime Minister, it's another uncomfortable defeat. The night before debate resumes on her Brexit deal, this was a reminder for Theresa May that without a majority, she's not in sole control of this process, and Parliament is increasingly flexing its muscles.
New questions have been raised about one of the ferry company contracts signed by the government to alleviate any delays that might result from a no-deal Brexit. Labour have accused ministers of failing to do adequate checks on the business experience of the directors of the firm Seabourn Freight. Criticism had already been raised because the firm has never operated ferries before. Here's our transport correspondent, Tom Burridge.
The Department for Transport's £14 million contract with Seabourn Freight has been dogged by controversy since it was announced. Today, the company, which plans to run a ferry service for lorries from Ramsgate in Kent to Ostend in Belgium to ease pressure at Dover if Britain leaves the European Union without a deal, faced further scrutiny. This was the response of the Mayor of Ostend, Bart Tomerlane, when the BBC asked him if the port in his city would be ready to receive ships by the end of March.
No, that's impossible. We are interested in a ferry line. We have a positive attitude because we have a harbour and the harbour needs traffic. That's normal. But there are some inconveniences and also some investments to do in our harbour, in the harbour of Ramsgate. And also we need some guarantees about the profitability of this ferry line and the solvency of this company.
And this afternoon in the Commons, opposition parties grilled the Transport Secretary on whether his department had properly vetted Seabourn's directors, after it emerged that two of them had previously run companies which had gone bust. One of the liquidated firms in question still owes the UK tax authorities nearly £600,000. Labour's Shadow Transport Secretary is Andy MacDonald.
This is a shoddy and tawdry affair and the Secretary of State is making a complete mess of it. This contract is very likely unlawful and violates every current best practice guidance issued by Whitehall.
The Transport Secretary Chris Grayling said Seabourn Freight would only receive government money if and when ferries ran.
That is responsible stewardship of public money. Other matters, there are no reasons in the due diligence we have done to believe that any of those involved in this business are not fit to do business with government.
It's also emerged that research commissioned by the government in 2017 found that an extra 70-second check on each lorry at Dover would cause queues of 6 days at the border. The Department for Transport said the study, carried out by University College London, had been superseded by more recent analysis, which was less stark.
Will my travel be affected when we leave the EU?
Today, government radio adverts aired, encouraging people to wise up about the implications of Britain leaving the European Union without a deal.
Find guidance and up-to-date information at gov.uk/EU exit.
The Metropolitan Police have promised to deal robustly with any protesters who harass and abuse MPs at Westminster. The force was responding to mounting calls from MPs who've expressed alarm at an increasingly threatening atmosphere outside Parliament as the Brexit process reaches a climax. On Monday, the Conservative backbencher and Remain supporter Anna Soubry was verbally abused by protesters who called her a Nazi and a liar. In the Commons, the Speaker, John Bercow, demanded the police deal with what he called aggressive and intimidating behaviour, saying the group of small but vocal demonstrators represented a type of fascism.
It is frankly intolerable if members of Parliament and journalists go about their business in fear. This situation cannot stand. I have written with force, passion and politeness to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, seeking a review of policy.
Scotland Yard has said it would be enhancing the policing presence in the run-up to next week's vote on Theresa May's Brexit deal. And it emerged tonight that new security advice has been issued to MPs. From Westminster, here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Danny Shaw.
Over the past 2.5 years, there's been impassioned debate on both sides of the Brexit divide among MPs and members of the public. Outside the Houses of Parliament, police have tried to allow the voices of protest to be heard, anxious not to be seen to be stifling free speech. But in the past few months, the tone has become more shrill and hostile. Yesterday, as Anna Soubry was being interviewed in a cordoned-off media area opposite the House, a group of pro-Brexit campaigners tried to drown her out.
Soubry is a Nazi! Soubry is a Nazi! Soubry is a Nazi!
Later, as the Conservative MP made her way to the Commons, she was surrounded by a group of men who appeared to block her path in front of police officers.
Why are you special that you shouldn't be confronted by the public, madam? But her voice is worth more than 17.4 million. It's funny, isn't it? It's not Lammy, I do apologise. Please, can you tell me?
After the footage was broadcast, politicians on all sides condemned what had happened. Theresa May's official spokesman said she told Cabinet colleagues it was not how debate should be conducted in Britain. The Labour MP Jess Phillips recalled the murder of her parliamentary colleague Jo Cox by a far-right activist 3 years ago and said the demonstrators were trying to silence them.
These people, they are trying to frighten us so that we do something different, so that when I'm reminded that my friend was murdered in the street, that maybe I won't come on the television and talk about it. They're trying to scare us.
More than 100 MPs signed a letter to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner Cressida Dick, claiming there'd been a lack of coordination by the authorities in their handling of what they said was the deteriorating public order and security situation outside Parliament. The Met responded by drafting in extra officers and promising to deal robustly with anyone who breaks the law. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Lawrence Taylor said Brexit was a challenging issue for the police and he acknowledged improvements were needed.
We've reviewed the policing down at Westminster. I've given very clear direction to officers that if substantive offences are witnessed at the scene, I do expect arrests to be made and I do expect us to intervene if people are prevented from going about their daily business.
Anna Soubry said she wouldn't be deterred by what had gone on and claimed those involved in the protests were a small group of far-right extremists.
In a democracy, we want people to be able to speak to their politicians and we want people to be able to protest. What's been happening has gone way beyond that, but it's a minority.
Tonight, as the Tory MP made her way to the Houses of Parliament, there was strong support from Remain campaigners.
For she's a jolly good fella, for she's a jolly good fella.
Police say there have been no arrests so far, but they're continuing to review the incidents and take legal advice as to whether crimes have been committed.
Scotland Yard says a full criminal investigation has begun after a drone sighting caused disruption to some flights at Heathrow Airport. Planes were stopped from taking off from one of the runways for an hour early this evening. Heathrow's apologised to passengers who were affected. The airport, Europe's busiest, is now fully operational. The Ministry of Defence says it's deploying specialist equipment at the request of the police. Ben Ando reports.
Takeoffs from the northern runway at Heathrow were halted after several people, including police officers, spotted a drone flying nearby. The airport said it was a precautionary measure, and after a discussion with the police and air traffic control, departures resumed after just under an hour. Police say they're carrying out searches to find the drone and its operator and say they're also being helped by military experts. BBC cameraman Martin Roberts was driving past the airport and believes it was a large device.
The traffic was fairly slow, so I could see, I'd say about 300 feet up, very bright, stationary, flashing red and green lights. I could tell it was a drone. These things have got quite distinctive lights, and I could see it very clearly for about 4 or 5 minutes.
Heathrow has 2 runways, one north and one south of the terminal buildings. The southern runway remained open throughout, allowing incoming flights to land. Last month, reports of drone activity led to chaos at Gatwick Airport, when its runway was closed intermittently over a 3-day period, causing delays for tens of thousands of people just before Christmas. Both Heathrow and Gatwick have confirmed they will be spending millions on high-tech systems to detect drones and block their operators' control signals in an effort to minimise future disruption.
A judge has ruled that the Scottish Government acted unlawfully while investigating sexual harassment claims against the former First Minister Alex Salmond. The Scottish Government has admitted that it breached its own guidelines by appointing an investigating officer who had prior involvement with the case. Mr Salmond has always denied the claims. The current First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said the outcome was deeply regrettable. Here's our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith.
Complaints of sexual misconduct were made against Alex Salmond by 2 women last year, dating back to his time as First Minister of Scotland. Those allegations were investigated by the Scottish Government, but their conclusions have not been published, and now they never will be, as the Scottish Government has been forced to admit it breached its own guidelines while investigating the complaints. According to the judge, Lord Pentland, that meant the inquiry was unlawful, unfair and tainted with apparent bias, because the investigating officer had substantial contact with the women who complained about Mr Salmond's behaviour before the investigation began. Speaking to reporters outside the Court of Session in Edinburgh, Mr Salmond described the decision as an abject humiliation for the Scottish Government.
The last time I was in that court, it was to be sworn in as First Minister of Scotland. I never thought it possible that at any point I'd be taking the Scottish Government to court.
Mr Salmond's case focused on points of procedure. The details of the allegations against him were not considered in court. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, says she wants to apologise to the women who raised the complaints.
It's deeply regrettable that we're in the situation we're in today, not least for the complainants who had a right to expect that this process would be in every respect robust, and of course the Scottish Government will seek to learn any lessons from that.
The Scottish Government say they may reopen the investigation into Mr Salmond, but not before ongoing police inquiries have concluded. This case could cost the government up to £500,000, as they will now have to pay most of Mr Salmond's legal costs. He had raised £100,000 through online crowdfunding to pay for his legal action. Any money left over, he says, will go to good causes in Scotland.
President Trump is expected to tell Americans later that the country faces a humanitarian and security crisis on its border with Mexico. He'll address the nation from the Oval Office for the first time and once again urge the Democrats in Congress to approve funds for the security barrier he wants to build. The dispute has led to a partial shutdown of the federal government, which is now in its third week. There's been speculation that Mr Trump might declare a state of emergency to try to bypass Congress. Our correspondent Gary O'Donoghue reports from Washington.
All the major TV and cable networks will carry the president's address, which White House officials say will last for around 8 minutes. What is clear is that it will be a determined attempt to persuade American voters that there is a national emergency on the southwest border. Currently, a majority of them do not support the idea of a wall and blame Republicans and Donald Trump for the partial government shutdown. What is less clear is whether the president will announce a plan to invoke emergency powers, which could allow him to direct money and manpower to the construction of the wall without congressional approval. The Vice President, Mike Pence, set out the administration's argument.
Nearly 60,000 people over the past several months have attempted to come into our country illegally, and it simply is overwhelming the ability of our Customs and Border Patrol to deal with it. Add to that human trafficking, the flow of narcotics, and the American people will hear from the president tonight that we have a crisis.
Mr Pence and other members of the administration have been severely criticised by Democrats for using misleading numbers for suspected terrorists trying to enter the country illegally from Mexico. The vast majority of those on watch lists try to gain access to the US via airports. And most of those in the country illegally enter legally and then overstay their visas. But numbers aside, this is as much about winning the rhetorical argument, one which, given the wall's importance to many of his supporters, the president can't really afford to lose.
A Russian lawyer who took part in a controversial meeting at Trump Tower in New York in 2016 has been charged with obstructing justice. Natalia Veselnitskaya is alleged to have submitted false declarations to a federal judge in a case concerning tax evasion. The 2016 meeting is at the centre of the Mueller inquiry into links between the Trump campaign and Russia. Ms. Veselnitskaya has denied working for the Kremlin. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has severely criticised suggestions by the US National Security Advisor John Bolton that Turkey should protect Kurdish fighters after America withdraws its troops from Syria. Turkey supports President Trump's decision to pull out, but regards the US-backed Kurdish forces as terrorists. From Washington, here's Barbara Platasher.
The United States has about 2,000 special operations forces in northeastern Syria, directing the ground war against Islamic State militants. Their local allies are Syrian Kurdish fighters who've helped push the group out of nearly all the territory it once held. But President Trump's surprise decision to withdraw the U.S. troops has created complications. He apparently accepted a Turkish offer to take over the mop-up operation against IS remnants in the wake of a U.S. military exit. Turkey, however, sees America's Kurdish allies as terrorists, and there's concern in Washington that without U.S. protection, the Turks would go after them. So John Bolton has said Turkey must guarantee their safety before any US withdrawal. This new condition infuriated Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. It was not the plan he believed he'd agreed with President Trump.
John Bolton çok ciddi bir yanlış yapmıştır.
John Bolton has made a serious mistake. It's not possible for us to make compromises on this point. Those who are part of the terror corridor in Syria will receive the necessary lesson.
Mr. Bolton did not get a meeting with the Turkish president, but a US official suggested he was forthright with Turkish officials, calling Mr. Erdogan's recent opinion piece about Turkey's plan to stabilize Syria wrong and offensive. There are also other issues behind the confusions and tensions over US-Syria policy. Senior advisors like Mr. Bolton and the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo see U.S. military involvement as a way to help counter Iran's influence in Syria. This is also Israel's focus, that a U.S. withdrawal would open up space for Iran. But it's not clear that Mr. Trump shares this concern. He's always wanted to just defeat the Islamic State militants. For the Pentagon, however, Mr. Trump's declaration of victory is premature. They say Islamic State militants are still a threat and could regroup. They're also skeptical that the Turkish military has the capability to effectively replace U.S. troops. Mr. Trump has eased up on his talk of an imminent departure for now, but his focus on bringing the troops home has jolted a complex web of regional alliances and competitions.
A 14-year-old boy has died in a stabbing in East London. He was attacked after his moped was involved in a collision with a car in Waltham Forest. No arrests have been made. The details from Lisa Costello.
Police were called to what was initially reported as a traffic accident at about 6:30. They found a 14-year-old boy with stab wounds, and despite attempts to save him, he was declared dead at the scene shortly afterwards. Officers have now established the boy had been riding a moped and that he was in a collision with a car. They believe 3 men who were in the vehicle got out and stabbed the boy before driving off. No arrests have been made and police are appealing for information. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has said he's greatly saddened by the attack and that his thoughts are with the boy's family.
Work has begun to dismantle and rebuild the roof of the house in Salisbury where the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal lived before he was poisoned with the nerve agent Novichok last March. The operation is part of the clean-up following the attack, which has been blamed on 2 members of Russia's military intelligence service. Our correspondent Richard Galpin reports.
Once scaffolding has been put up to cover the house, military teams will start dismantling the roofs of both the house and the garage. There are still thought to be traces of the nerve agent Novichok, which was initially smeared on the handle of the front door by the 2 Russian spies. The exposed timber in the roofs is absorbent and could pose a risk, so all the parts which are taken down will be carefully sealed and removed from the area. Local officials stress there is no risk to neighbours. The work's expected to last around 6 weeks, after which builders will be brought in to replace the roofs. Alistair Cunningham of Wiltshire Council says there's no need to demolish the house.
The interior can be cleaned. If there's plaster need removed, wood, door frames, they can all be done quite simply and safely. We're simply doing what's necessary. To knock down the house would be a huge cost. It would send a message that this is far more invasive poison than it actually is.
For security reasons, it's highly unlikely Mr. Skripal will return to his house, so it may be put on sale, although the council says it may buy it to prevent any possibility of it being used as a bizarre kind of tourist attraction.
A man has admitted illegally publishing the personal data of around 1,000 politicians and public figures in Germany, including the Chancellor Angela Merkel. He was arrested on Sunday but released last night. Police said they had no evidence of his political leanings, but the hacking targeted all parties except the far-right Alternative for Germany. Damien McGuinness reports from Berlin.
The suspect is a 20-year-old German man from the western state of Hesse who still lives with his parents. He appears to have been acting on his own and is thought to have taught himself how to hack his victims' emails and social media accounts. Throughout 2018, he gathered vast amounts of data and in December started releasing it online. But he was less good at creating a buzz around the hack. It wasn't until last week that officials noticed what was going on. Around 1,000 German politicians, journalists and celebrities were targeted, including the Chancellor Angela Merkel. The suspect says he chose his victims simply because they annoyed him. Most of the data contained contact information, such as addresses, emails and phone numbers. But in some cases, more private details were also published, including bank statements, family photos and private correspondence. So far, the data breach hasn't led to any major problems or uncovered any scandals, but it has sparked a national debate about cyber security. If one inexperienced young man sitting in his bedroom can gather and release so much personal information, there are worries about what malevolent hackers or criminal gangs could do.
In the city, the 100 share index closed up 51 points at 6,862. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones ended the day 257 points higher at 23,787. On the currency markets, against the dollar, the pound was down 1/5 cent at $1.27.3. Against the euro, the pound was unchanged at €1.11.2, making a euro worth 89.9 pence. A former youth football coach has died in a car crash on the day he was due to stand trial for historical sexual abuse. Michael Carson's car hit a tree yesterday morning. Mr. Carson, who was 75, had been facing allegations involving 11 boys under the age of 16. Our sports correspondent Richard Conway sent this report from Peterborough Crown Court.
Michael Carson, better known as Kit, worked for many years at Peterborough United, Cambridge United and Norwich City as a football coach, helping to develop a string of leading players. He was due to stand trial on 12 counts of indecent assault and one of inciting a child to engage in sexual activity, which allegedly took place between 1979 and 2009. He had pleaded not guilty at an earlier hearing. But Peterborough Crown Court was told today Mr. Carson died yesterday morning when the car he was driving left the road and hit a tree around 7 miles east of Cambridge. No other person or vehicle was said to be involved. Judge Matthew Lowe ruled that the case file against Mr. Carson would therefore be closed.
Now for our first look at the morning papers. The Daily Telegraph says Conservative rebels have drawn first blood in the battle to stop a no-deal Brexit. It says they began a guerrilla war with their victory on the finance bill in the Commons. The Guardian also opts for military language, calling it parliamentary warfare. The Times says it was an historic defeat for Theresa May, as it's the first time a government has lost a vote on a finance bill for 40 years. The Daily Mail leads on the harassment of MPs outside Parliament in recent days, saying one of the leaders of the protests has links to UKIP. It says the behaviour of what it calls agitators and extremists has been appalling. The Eye says politicians have told it about a marked increase in aggressive behaviour by protesters. The Sun says there's been drone chaos again, this time at Heathrow. The Times says the latest alarm has raised fears about security at British airports, with critics demanding to know why defences have not been installed since the disruption at Gatwick before Christmas. The Irish golfer Padraig Harrington has been chosen as Europe's new Ryder Cup captain. He takes over from Denmark's Thomas Bjorn, who led the European team to victory over the United States in France last autumn. Europe will attempt to defend the trophy in Wisconsin next year. Here's our golf correspondent, Ian Carter.
Padraig Harrington was the natural choice to take over as captain. The 47-year-old from Dublin has enjoyed a glittering playing career in which he won 3 major titles, including 2 Open Championships. Harrington has played in 6 Ryder Cups and was a vice-captain in each of the last 3 contests. Although he's been the leading candidate for the role for some time, Harrington admitted he had to think long and hard before accepting the appointment.
I sat down and thought about this. Do I want to put myself out there? Do I want to take this chance? And I've always been prepared to do that in the golf course. This is a little different in the challenge, but yeah, I want to take that chance of being a successful captain. I'm prepared to put my legacy somewhat on the line.
His appointment has been widely welcomed, with Europe's top player Justin Rose leading the congratulations. But Harrington faces one of the toughest challenges in golf, to win an away match in the Ryder Cup. Next year's event will be played on the banks of Lake Michigan at Whistling Straits in Wisconsin. Europe last won away from home in 2012. America haven't won on their travels since 1993.
The headlines again. The government has narrowly lost a vote in the Commons designed to make it more difficult for the UK to leave the EU without a deal. 17 former ministers are among 20 Tory rebels. Downing Street said it made only the most minor and technical changes to legislation. Police are stepping up their presence at Westminster as the Commons resumes its debate on Theresa May's Brexit deal and have promised to deal robustly with any protesters who harass MPs. The Ministry of Defence is deploying specialist equipment at Heathrow Airport after flight departures were briefly suspended following sightings of a drone. President Trump is preparing to make an address from the Oval Office on the budget row over a border wall, which has led to a partial shutdown of the government. BBC News.